whistleblowers, people who expose the powerful, they destroy them. And we know this when this happens. And somehow everyone has failed Julian. They've all failed Julian. They've taken every negative angle they have been able to. You can do that to anyone. You can destroy anyone like that. You just need to start over-analyzing them. Sweetie.
This is Radio Free Assange.
Deputy Speaker, Julian Assange is an Australian citizen born in Townsville in 1971. He is the founder of WikiLeaks and an award-winning journalist. For the last decade, he has been in confinement or in prison in England. In 2010, WikiLeaks published US government information and documents allegedly provided by US Army Intelligence Officer Chelsea Manning. The US government alleged that Assange was a party to the hacking of its IT system, therefore violating the US Espionage Act of 1917, and is attempting to extradite him from England to the USA on charges of conspiracy to receive, obtain and disclose classified information. In 2010, Sweden also sought to extradite Assange from England to Sweden to face alleged rape charges. In the course of those proceedings, Assange breached bail and sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in England, where he was granted protection until April 2019. On the 11th of April, on leaving the embassy, he was arrested by English police for breaching bail, sentenced to 50 weeks jail, and after more than 60 weeks, he is still in prison. In November 2019, the Swedish government closed their rape case against Assange. The US extradition case commenced on the 24th of February this year. The case was scheduled to resume on the 18th of May, but has now been pushed out until September. On the latest figures that I have seen, over 400,000 people have now signed a petition calling for Assange's freedom. A widely held view is that the USA failed to secure its IT system and that its wrongdoings, covert operations and war crimes were publicly and embarrassingly exposed. So, under the protection of national security being breached and lives being endangered, the US wants to make an example of Assange that exposing US secrets will not be tolerated. New revelations about the war crimes, where 11 civilians, including 2 journalists, were killed in Baghdad in July 2007, were recently exposed by the Guardian newspaper. Furthermore, there is no evidence that any lives were put at risk by the WikiLeaks revelations. It is also worth noting that Assange is not a US citizen and was not in the USA when the hacking occurred. The USA is attempting to extend its internal laws to overseas jurisdictions while simultaneously denying Assange protection under the US First Amendment that US citizens would...
What did you see today?
Well, I felt, coming here this morning, I felt a great sense of optimism and hope. I did feel that. I felt very positive.
Quiet!
And I do think that the case, if you zoom out and if you look at the time it's happening and, you know, everything that's involved in the world and what's going on today, I feel like there is hope, you know, and just looking at, first of all, I got my American visa, which is a really good sign. So, you know, coming here without my passport because it's actually at the embassy, and it's like, you know, I feel like everyone has suffered enough, like Julian suffered enough, the people have suffered enough, and if you look at the war crimes or think about the war crimes, the victims have suffered enough and Americans have suffered enough, and right now we're at a time where the problems are just different, and even if you take into account, you know, what this case is about, and the concept of what intelligence and the intelligence systems that have been set up in the world, even those things are changing, you know. And just having witnessed the court case on YouTube with the heads of every sort of cyber, you know, technological leaders, from Mark Zuckerberg or Tim Cook at Apple or Mr. Amazon, and then hearing this case within a month's space, and the detailed it's scrutinized at, and every sort of combing of every random tweet that was ever made, you know, and using Wayback Machines to go into every single detail in the scope that it's combed through, compared to how, you know, having Silicon Valley hearing and how not much was really discussed in detail. It kind of shows where we're at, you know, and who's really in control and what's happening. So I just feel like in that sense, I do have optimism that the world is changing so fast that, you know, hopefully everyone sort of draws the line that, you know, the suffering is been enough, and that we can all sort of move forward into a different phase where we actually have really real relevant issues on surveillance and how we're going to go into the future, and how you know, that sort of relates to everybody in the world, not just Americans. I think these conversations are really important, and those need to be had, and I think Julian's an important and an intelligent contribution to those kind of conversations, and there's no point, you know, locking him up and throwing away the key when we actually need to expand, you know, our knowledge on cyber, the future of what cyber surveillance and security and these things are.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful, thank you. It's very educational.
This is Radio Free Assange.
I'm quite proud of that. That's we have built a really grand project. In some ways, a grand dream to create a rebel library of Alexandria.
Hands up, Assange!
This is Radio Free Assange.
And we demand free Julian Assange! 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 No extradition! Beyond the censor!
This is Radio Free Assange.
Free Julian Assange! No extradition!
This is Radio Free Assange. Journalism is not a crime. Free Julian Assange.
No extradition!
You are listening to Radio.
But yeah, hopefully, like, you know, like there's change on both sides, and it sort of balances out.
I'm sure we're going to win.
Yeah.
Looking at this.
Well, I asked a cabbie for a mask today to go into court, and I didn't have one, and it said winner.
This is Radio Free Assange.
I'm quite proud of that. That's we have built a really grand project, in some ways a grand dream, to create a rebel library of Alexandria.
Hands up, Assange!
This is Radio Free Assange.
And we demand free Julian Assange! 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 No extradition! Anyone that's censored! No extradition!
This is Radio Free Assange.
Free Julian Assange! No extradition!
This is Radio Free Assange. Journalism is not a crime. Free Julian Assange.
No extradition!
You are listening to
The best news of all is that courage is contagious. We have this myth sometimes, this myth that the future is something that is fixed, static, out there, waiting to happen to us. But the future doesn't happen to us. It's not fixed. It's not out there. The future is created by us, by the aggregation of the millions of choices each of us makes every day. And so I want to leave you with two questions. Number one, what is the future that we want to create? And number two, do we have the courage to create it?
You are listening to Radio Free Assange. Journalism is no crime. Jail the war criminals. Free Julian Assange.
In democracies, wars are a result of lies. And why one might think that should lead us to a state of despair.
Prosecution trying to prove that water runs uphill and up is down, with a deluge of detail about the timing of the mass release of the cache of cables. The defence replied and conclusively demonstrated that it was David Lee. We can only conclude from the amount of time that the prosecution spent defending David Lee is that David Lee is a state asset. So anyway, the defence, I don't like to say the defence actually, we progressed and we, I think, moved to the place where the case will be thrown out, that the extradition will fail on the grounds that there is simply no evidence and no means to extradite Julian to the United States.
Beautiful. Thank you.
This is Radio Free Assange.
I'm quite proud of that. That's we have built a really grand project, in some ways a grand dream, to create a rebel library of Alexandria.
Hands up, Assange!
This is Radio Free Assange.
And we demand free Julian Assange! 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 No extradition! Anyone that's censored!
This is Radio Free Assange.
Free Julian!
I'm here to support Julian because I don't see enough people in the media supporting him, and I think it's very important that, especially in those days where people are not supporting him in masses, like to be there and support him. And I think, especially in those days where war criminals like George Bush are being publicly supported by a whole fringe of even the left, and Julian is behind bars, and having known Julian for like 10 years now and having seen the way he's been treated over those last 10 years is very unfair. So I'm just here to show my support.
Now in French?
La même chose en français? Je suis ici pour supporter Julian, que je connais depuis 10 ans, et en l'ayant vu au travers des années, la façon dont il a été traité, que ce soit dans l'ambassade ou depuis qu'il est en prison, je trouvais que c'était important de venir le supporter, car dans les médias, et les journalistes en particulier, ne le supportent pas assez, parce que c'est leur job qui est mis en danger avec l'exemple que la justice essaie de faire de Julian. Et donc c'était important pour moi de le supporter, surtout dans une époque où on ne supporte pas assez les gens comme Julian, qui sont des gens qui se sont battus toute leur vie, et qu'on met en exergue des criminels de guerre comme George Bush, que je vois être présenté comme quelqu'un de bien par toute une partie de la gauche.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Bravo.
Vive
Julien. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
This is Radio Free Assange.
I'm quite proud of that. That's we have built a really grand project, in some ways a grand dream, to create a rebel library of Alexandria.
Hands up, Assange!
This is Radio Free Assange.
And we demand free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
When we were ready, wonderful man. Okay, Mr. Russman, what happened in court this morning?
Well, we heard from a witness, a computer expert, Professor Grothoff, who testified about the timeline that led to the release of the unredacted diplomatic cables in September 2011. It's very important to establish that because how that came about, because at the core of the entire argument here is that WikiLeaks behaved irresponsibly, and that the unredacted cable contained names of people that could be harmed, etc. So establishing what really happened before September 2011 is important. And Professor Grothoff was investigated the timeline, what led to that, and came to the conclusion that actually the individuals responsible for that happening were the Guardian journalists Luke Harding and David Lee, who published a passphrase to a very strongly encrypted document with the cables. That happened in February 2011, 6 months before WikiLeaks published. It was known, this irresponsible behavior by the Guardian journalists, which is inexcusable. And actually, even if people read this book, it tells the story of how Julian was so reluctant to give them the password and the documents that he even gave the Guardian journalist only part of the password, but whispered the part that was missing in his ear, because so it was never written down. And then go and actually publish it in a book is totally irresponsible. And that led to a chain of events that at the end of August it was known that the information was out there, the cat was out of the bag. And actually, WikiLeaks was not the first entity to publish these documents at the end of August, beginning of September 2011. there were at least two other entities. A website, American-based, called Cryptum, and another website who actually published these cables. So what WikiLeaks did after that had materialized was basically to republish those already published documents. So this basically sweeps from the rug from under the feet of the prosecutor, who are trying to establish that there was a total irresponsibility on the behalf of WikiLeaks. So this is a very important element in the defense to establish this. There has been a lot of talk also about those who are supposedly put in harm's way. And it's mentioned that those are names who have in brackets a label called strictly protect. And the prosecution is trying to establish that this means that these are individuals that could basically be killed if their names are exposed. That is absolute rubbish. This is not even an official classification. And if you actually just go online and look through these documents, strictly protect means the Americans have an interest in not revealing who their sources are. We are talking about here even MPs in Western countries, Labour Party, and individuals in Sweden, in the UK, in Australia, in my home country Iceland, in many countries where individuals were giving information to American embassy staff. That's important to keep in mind as well. Often it was newsworthy that people possibly working for their own government were passing information to the Americans. There's a different word for those individuals, but it's newsworthy to point out that some people were playing that game.
And the prosecution, I mean, has tried to say that the people have been put in danger, but they haven't been able to prove a single name. Is that correct?
Not a single incident has emerged and been pointed out. And mind you, it's 10 years. Not a single individual has been physically harmed or his life put in physical danger as we know it. And that has not been established in this court, never before anywhere. No harm. And weigh that fact, undisputable fact, against all the harm that has been exposed by the WikiLeaks document. Weigh that together. And if you do that, the entire arguments by the prosecution here just falls flat on its face.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
This is Radio Free Assange.
I'm quite proud of that. That's we have built a really grand project. In some ways, a grand dream to create a rebel library of Alexandria.
Hands up, Assange!
This is Radio Free Assange.
And we demand free Julian Assange! 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 No extradition! Beyond the censor!
This is Radio Free Assange.
Free Julian Assange!